As discussed, we have talked about restrictions of a function. What did I mean by restriction of a function? You take a function, pick some variables, probably the ones which you like, and assign them some particular value. So let's say if I picked x3, x4, I say, oh, x3 equal to 1, x4 is equal to minus 1. Or x3 equal to 1, x4 equal to 1. As soon as you fix these values, your function is now defined on a smaller input space, correct? If my function was this, it had n variables. If I change it such that x3 equal to 1 and x4 equal to minus 1, I can think of it as that I have now n minus 2 variables, or a more general way is to think that my new subspace, new input space is 0, 1 to the power. Anindya, would you like to take a guess?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to take a guess? The new input space is now what? It was 0, 1 to the power n. I have fixed two variables. What is the new
So
input space?
So it's a n minus 2 dimension vector space.
Correct. It is now 0, 1 to the power n minus 2. Right? This is my new function which I have restricted to two variables. Now, this was not fun enough for me, so I will generalize the definition of restrictions. I'm going to define more complicated restrictions. And luckily, you have seen such a restriction in your assignment. Let's, in some sense, see the solution of the assignment problem. What we are going to do is to fix parities now. Remember our old friends, our things by which we make the Fourier expansion. We are going to fix them instead of the variables. Let's look at a simple question. You take a function. In this case, let's say majority on three variables, and then fix the parity x1, x2 is equal to minus 1. Correct. Now, going by our intuition of restrictions before, I should take the Fourier expression. Wherever I find x1, x2, I should substitute. What should I substitute?
Minus 1.
Minus 1, right? And so you have to believe me that this is the Fourier expression for majority. You can check that. And now if I pick x1, x2 is equal to minus 1, there is only one place where I see that x1 and x2 are present together. I input minus 1, and then I am left with this Fourier expression. Going by our intuition of how we substituted variables, if I substitute parity, then I am getting this. Let's take a step back. Let's think of it in a more natural way. You wanted to talk about majority. It had three variables. Now someone tells you that x1, x2 is equal to minus 1. That means I'm only worried about inputs where x1, x2 is equal to minus 1. And I want to understand what my function is. So the definition of the restriction is clear, right? My new function has a smaller input space. It is allowed to have only those inputs. So now my function will be defined on x's such that x1, x2 is equal to minus 1. And how many inputs are going to be like that, by the way? Anyone would like to take a guess?
Half of the entire inputs.
Very good. It is just 2 to the power n minus 1. In this case, you had three variables. So now there were 8 inputs, only 4 inputs will remain. What are those inputs? 1, minus 1, 1, 1, minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, 1, 1, minus 1, 1. All the other all the other four inputs had x1, x2 is equal to 1. So they are discarded. My new function is only on these four inputs. And if you think about it, if x1, x2 is equal to minus 1, then what do I know about the relationship between x1 and x2?
They are not same.
They are not same. That means what should be my majority?
This sum is 0.
N minus 2. Majority of N minus 2.
Majority of n minus 2. Or in this case, I was just talking about 3 variables, so it should be just the majority of x3. Correct? Because x1 and x2 are going to be different. So 1 and minus 1, their contribution is going to be the same. It will cancel out. That means when I restrict majority of x to x1, x2 is equal to minus 1, I should get only x3. Do you agree?
Yes.
Why am I getting this then? Where is the problem?
X1 plus X2 is 0 here, right? We have not used that.
So how do we know x1 plus x2 is 0?
Since their product is minus 1, obviously, and the values that I can have is minus 1 and 1 only, then X1 plus X2 can, I mean, they will be 0. I mean, we can check that.
Okay, right. Another way to think about this is that x1, x2 is equal to minus 1. That means x1 is equal to minus x2. Correct? And you can substitute even that relationship. Right? So what happens to x1 and x2? When I'm restricting x1, x2 equal to minus 1, that means x1 is equal to minus x2 also. This was my function, and there I substitute this, I will get as I wanted majority. Sorry, I should just say restricted to x1, x2. But you realize now that this is going to be slightly complicated, right? How do I figure out which parities are related, which parities should I substitute together, and things like that? Right? In this case, it was easy. It was just x1, x2. So you knew x1 plus x2 was 0.
So just a guess that as we know, I mean, we can define a function by its Fourier representation. So, and as we have already seen that all the parities are just a vector space. So this x1, x2 is one of the vectors, and we are setting that coordinate. I mean, the coordinate that is being defined by this vector. I mean, if I extend this to a basis, and then we can model it how we were using the restriction in the previous way.
Right. So let me put it this way: you are probably you have the correct intuition. But I think we are thinking on the same line. So let me put it my way. If you look at these x1, x2, and x1, x2, if you look at their vectors, what do I look?
X1, X2, I mean, linearly dependent.
Yeah, exactly. They are linearly dependent. That means this is not the correct representation. Whenever I have things which are linearly dependent, I should express them in terms of each other. As you were saying, that kind of create a basis and come up with the smallest representation possible. So now I'm going to do it in generality. Okay, there is a bit of notation here. Do not worry about it. It might seem intimidating, but the idea is very, very simple. It is simple vector space manipulation, and we will do it 2 or 3 times so that you become familiar. Okay, let's analyze what happens to our Fourier representation when we restrict our parities to take only certain values. Is the task clear? Yes, no? Okay, so let me just repeat it. Our task is we are given a function. On that function, we take a subset of parities and fix them. Like we were fixing x1, x2. Now I can take a subset of parities and I can fix them. Assume them to be linearly independent so that there is no conflict. You really can't set x1 equal to 1, x2 equal to 1, and x1, x2 equal to -1. That is ridiculous, right? So I will assume that you are only restricting a linearly independent set of parities. Call them gamma. If you restrict gamma to some values or elements of gamma to some values, what happens to your Fourier expression? That's what we want to figure out. Questions? Okay. So let me start. The important thing to realize is that if you pick any gamma, leave alone how you are assigning the values to gamma. A gamma divides all of the parities into equivalence classes. Okay, so it is bunching up things which are related. If gamma had x1, x2, then x1, parity x1 and parity x2 are related. We understand. Right? So then we say that two parities are related if they can be written in terms of each other using gamma. Does that sound good? Does the definition become clear? This is what we wanted, right? Two parities are related if one parity can be written in terms of other using gamma. In some sense, the parities in gamma are free for it. That means when I take the Fourier expression where I fix gamma 1 had a monomial before, gamma 2 had a monomial before. Those coefficients will get, what will happen to those coefficients?
I mean, they will be replaced by constants.
Yes, they will be merged.
Yes.
They need not be replaced by a constant. They might get merged. So, for example, if it was x1, x3 and x2, x3, and I had fixed x1, x2, x3. Correct?
Yes, and then x1, x3 would be replaced by x2 into something.
X2. Right. So it will become some constant times x2. So these two monomials will get merged. Right? The way to think of this is if gamma 1 is written, so you first talk about gamma, the big set of parities, you find a basis of that. This is what Vatsal was also suggesting. You write gamma 1 in terms of gamma and then some alpha. Similarly, you take gamma 2, you write in terms of again gamma and some beta. Then alpha, you can write it such that alpha is equal to beta. This is where your coefficient will go to. As Udit already mentioned, if I can convert x1, x3 into x2 and then I can write all the coefficients in terms of x2. Now, this is a matter of equivalence relation, so I wouldn't say alpha is unique. The point is, all the gammas which are related between each other, they will go to the same monomial. You can choose which monomial you want. You can pick actually any monomial in the sequence. But finally, you will be left with just one monomial for all of the parities in one equivalence class. Is that okay? Do you want to see an example?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So which function do we want to take? Let's say half x1 plus 1 by 4 x2 plus 1 by 3 x1 x2 plus 6 x1 x2 x3. Okay, suppose this is my function. And what parities do you want to fix? Any guess? Anything? Let's say x2 x3. Okay. Again, I'm taking a simple case where I'm just fixing one parity, but your gamma could be a list of parities, right? And then your subspace generated by them will be bigger, but that doesn't change anything. So suppose x2 x3 was equal to, actually it doesn't matter what was the value of x2 x3. Suppose if I fix x2 x3, then which of these coefficients will get related? Will x1 be related to x2? Can I write x1 in terms of x2 and x2 comma x3? Yes, no?
I think no.
No. x1 cannot be written in terms of x2, but clearly x1 and x1 x2 x3 will get merged, right? What about x2? x2 will actually get merged with x3. Unfortunately, there is no coefficient of x3. Let's take it. Okay, what about x1 x2? What will x1 x2?
X1 x3.
Sorry?
X1 x3.
Yes.
X1 x3.
x1 x3. Right? So let's take 4 x1 x3. Okay. And now, so these are what, this is one equivalence class. This is one equivalence class. This is another equivalence class. And it's easy to generate an equivalence class. If you want to generate equivalence class of x1, it is just x1 plus span of gamma. Right? These are all the parities which are related to x, which should be merged with x. Correct? Again, how to do it algorithmically and everything, don't worry about that. That's not the concern here. But it should be clear that these parities will get grouped together.
And sir, that decomposition of gamma 1 and gamma 2 was the direct sum decomposition, right?
Which gamma 1 and gamma 2? Where was gamma
So in
1?
the previous slide, this gamma
This
and
was
gamma 2 were
just as a vector space, right? This
so
is just
this alpha, I mean, the span of gamma part and this alpha part, these come from like these are the direct sum decomposition, right? Like these spaces.
Yes, you can view it as you can divide your whole space into span of gamma, direct space, that direct sum, the perpendicular space.
Yes.
No, you can't do it in f to the power n. The complement is not same as the orthogonal, right? But whatever is the complement space, so gamma, the span of gamma and the complement of gamma, you can divide your space like that.
We can extend the basis of gamma to a
Exactly,
complete basis, and then
exactly,
remaining
exactly.
basis vectors will.
Right, they will give you alpha. So notice that this representation is not unique, right? I can anyway add any element of span of gamma to alpha, and in the span of gamma it will change correspondingly, right?
That's why I was asking, like, when you said that alpha would be equal to beta because of gamma 1, gamma 2 belong to the span. So
That's why I
that's why I
said
was
that.
saying that.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned that you can pick your representation of gamma 1, gamma 2 such that alpha is
Okay, okay, okay.
right. This decomposition is definitely not unique, if that's what you are alluding to. But you can keep it in such a way so that all these alpha, beta, for gamma 3 is also in the same thing. All these come out to be the same. So that will be the new coefficient, new parity, which will be there in the restricted, right? Other way to say it is that in the restricted function, x1 will be merged with x1, x2, x3. Now you can keep the parity as x1, or you can keep the parity as x1, x2. That is up to you. Your coefficient will change slightly, but you can pick any representative of the equivalence class as the parity, which will have all the coefficients in the restricted. So f restricted will be some coefficient multiplied by x1, some coefficient multiplied by x2, some coefficient multiplied by x1. This coefficient will come because of x1 and x1, x2. This coefficient will come because of x2 and x3. This coefficient will come because of x1, x2 term and x1, x3. What I'm saying is that you don't need to have x1. If you want, you can even pick x1, x2, x3, and this coefficient will change. The point is, these coefficients will definitely get merged in the restricted function. And your coefficient will also depend upon how you fix x to x. If you fix x to x3 equal to 1, the coefficient here will be different. If you fix x to x3 equal to -1, the coefficient of x1 will be different in the restricted. And this can be thought of as the new way. So this was my Fourier transform. This is the general Fourier transform, right? For any function. What I'm going to do is club all gammas in an equivalence class together. That means, so for every equivalence class, right? If I have L equivalence classes, for every equivalence class, I will pick a representative. Like, for example, in this case, for the class of x1, x1, x2, x3, or for the equivalence class of this, which representative did I pick? X1. So this one was my beta 1, this one was my beta 2, this one was my beta 3, this one was my beta. Sorry, there is no x1, x2, x3. They are getting merged. So for every equivalence class, I am picking a representative that I am calling beta. And then I can merge everything else. For any gamma, if I want to understand how the restrictions will behave, this is how I should write my function. I should pick one element out of each equivalence class according to gamma. First, gamma divides your parities into equivalence class. Pick one member from each equivalence class. Those I am calling beta 1, beta 2, beta L. And then write your functions in terms of this. Remember here, it is still, this pjx is still a polynomial. It might be, for example, it might be like, so in this case, what will be my polynomial? It will be half plus 6x2. I have just clubbed both the coefficients of x1 and x1, x2, x3. So this is my chi of beta 1, and this is p1 of x. What is special about p1 of x? As soon as I fix the value of gamma parities, my p1x will become constant. Very nice. So this is how my Fourier expression will change. I have a function, I club the parities in same equivalence class together, and then when I fix the parities, these px's become constant, as mentioned. So my restricted function simply looks like this. It is now just represented in terms of representatives of all the equivalence classes. Notice pjx has become pjb because pjx is just a function of the parities in gamma. Okay, this is how restriction works. Okay, now let me tell you why we are studying all this. We are going to figure out better and better relationship between sparsity and rank. And what is going to help us is called Sang's lemma. What Sang's lemma says is that for any function, there exist only square root k parities. Remember, k is the sparsity. There always exist just square root k parities. Fixing them, f becomes constant. Okay, so there exist some square root k parities. Okay, not k parities. Obviously, if you are allowed to fix k parities, then however you fix them, your function will become constant. You just fix all the parities in the sum. What Sang's lemma is saying is something non-trivial. It is saying you only allowed to have square root k parities. You fix them. There is a particular assignment. If you pick that assignment, those your function will become constant. Okay.
That says that the rank would be square root k, right?
No, that is not correct. You might take it as a first guess. I see it. This might be a confusion. But
Like
the bound.
I was seeing it like this. So if there is some rank, and if I know the value of parities of all the bases of the rank, then I know the value of parities over all
Not
over all the
necessarily.
support.
No, not necessarily.
Since they are rated by the product thing, right?
No, their coefficients could get cancelled, right? For example, look at the majority. Right? You remember majority function which we started with?
Yes, sir.
We set x1, x2 equal to -1, right?
Yes.
From that, the coefficient of x1 and x2 both got cancelled out. Right? It became, the function became, if my function was half x1 plus x2 plus x1 x2, okay,
Yes, sir. Okay, I got
right? Suppose this was my function, and if I set x1 x2 is equal to -1, my function will become constant. Remember what happened to parity, right? X1 and x2 will
Yes,
get
sir.
cancelled,
Yes.
right? But do you think that this function has rank 1? Obviously not. Right? This function has rank 2.
Okay.
So yes, the parities will get dependent on each other, but it does not mean that every parity can be written as a function of these square parities.
Okay, so the number of restrictions are lesser than the rank.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's see what bound. So that is why I'm saying the bound, it will come up, we will come up with this k by 2 plus root. Okay. So this will be the first non-trivial. How will that happen, right? We remember that this is what was happening, correct? This is how our Fourier expression was getting changed when we were putting the parities in gamma to value b. It was coming like that. Now if you know that this is constant, that means if there was a parity whose Fourier coefficient was non-zero, it must have got merged with some other parity. This is the essential idea. So let me know if this is not clear, right? So what I'm saying is that with respect to this gamma, which makes the function constant, every equivalence class should have had at least 2 elements. Forget about the equivalence class which contains the constant. Leave alone, like that 1 or 2 thing doesn't matter. You're anyway talking about the order. But all the non-trivial parities have to be matched with some other parity. If they were not matched, they were the only one in an equivalence class, that coefficient will still remain, that parity will still remain in my restricted function. And my function cannot become constant. If x2, x3 had a coefficient of half, it doesn't get merged with anything. This will still remain in the restricted function. It will still remain as half x2, x3. So the function cannot be constant. It depends on parity x2, x3. Another way to say it is, if my function became constant, then every parity should have been merged with some other parity. Is that okay?
Yes.
Right? So that means how many equivalence classes remain after restricting gamma? After restricting, sorry,
power n minus dimension power.
No. So you are getting it. Remember, we know the sparsity of f, right?
At most k by 2.
At most k by 2, right? So number of equivalence classes become less than k by 2 because every equivalence class had size more than 2. All the total elements with all the equivalence classes were k. Every equivalence class has more than 2 elements. That means the number of equivalence classes were less than k. So that means I can take the representatives of these equivalence classes, add gamma into it, and every parity can be expressed in terms of these parities. Every parity of f can be written in terms of the representative of these at most k by 2 equivalence classes and gamma. That is by definition of equivalence classes.
Yes.
How we were defining equivalence classes. That means actually trivially the rank is less than k by 2 plus k. Okay. But we are not happy with that. In the rest of the lecture, I want to give a better bound than that. But remember this Sang's lemma, this is the most important construct. Given a Boolean, remember it should be a Boolean function. If a Boolean function is given, we can pick root k parities such that fixing them, my function will become constant. There is one particular assignment to those root k parities, at least one particular assignment to those root k parities, such that my function becomes constant. And that gives a bound of k by 2 plus root k. My point is, yeah, really we are not happy. Why is that? For a function, let's say R is the rank of f and k is the sparsity of f. Okay, we will deal with R and k because otherwise it will take too much time to write everything. If you remember from last time, we saw this relation. And just now we proved this. That way we know that R should be more than log k, but R should be less than k by 2 plus. Do you remember this? R greater than log k. Why is R greater than log k?
Yes.
Right? Because if the space has dimension d, then the number of elements are at most
2 to the power d.
2 to the power d. So
Sir,
that
I
means
have found out in the previous
Sure.
slide.
sure.
This k by 2 is coming from the fact that we have k by 2 equivalence classes, right?
Right. That
And this root k is for gamma.
gamma, yes.
But why is this root k? Why is this not log k? Like since gamma is gamma is also a subset of like the support, right?
Gamma is, you can choose that gamma to be a support, but it can be as big as k, right? But Sang's lemma tells you that you can only need to put root k parities. So this is the gamma we are going to pick.
I was just thinking along the same log k lines. So since this gamma will be a subset of support of f, and that will have k elements, so the dimension of gamma can't be more than log k.
No. So the opposite way is obviously not correct, right? I can just give you n parities. They are not in the span of any log n parities. Right?
Oh,
So if
okay,
my
okay, okay.
if my
This
rank
gamma
is
only
log
can
k,
be all the support. I mean,
if my rank is log k, then my support has to be less than. That is correct. If my dimension is d, then the number of elements contained should definitely be less than 2 to the power d. But given d elements, they need not be in a log d vector space. That's clearly not true, right?
yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah. So do we have examples of functions where rank is log k? Actually, that was simple. And or majority, all of those were like rank is log k. What did we know of any function whose rank was very, very high, not log k, but very high?
Addressing function square root k.
Yes. We also saw that addressing function had rank, which was around
Square root k.
square root. So we only know of functions where rank is square root k, our bound is order of k. So what is the truth? Are there Boolean functions where we have better than root k, order of root k rank? Or for any Boolean function, my rank has to be small. Again, it turns out that Boolean functions are very, very special. For any Boolean function f, rank is, we know it might be better, but it cannot be more than square root k. The truth is very, very close to addressing. Addressing is one of the functions where rank is very, very high compared to sparsity, it's very hard to construct any other function, which is better. So this is already proved. We know. Between this, we don't know what is the correct answer. This is an open problem. For all Boolean functions, is the rank O of root k, or there exists a function where rank is square root k? It could be anything. We don't know. That's an open question. Is the setting clear? If it is, then we will go to the proof of this. Questions? Are we together? Have I lost you? Questions? We are just 4 or 5 people, right? So Vatsal,
Yes, sir.
so can I move ahead?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Arindya, let me know if there are any questions.
Fine, sir.
Fine. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So remember what happened. We applied Sang's lemma once. We got a bound of root k. A very, very natural approach might be to apply Sang's lemma again. What do I mean by that? So we had function f. What were the number of parities it depended upon, or the number of active parities? They were k, right? That is the sparsity. Now we applied Sang's lemma. We got f1. What happened to the number of active parities? F1 depended upon how many parities?
K by 2 plus root k.
Just k by 2, right? Like the number of active parities were k by 2.
Okay, okay.
Because I had fixed some gamma. Then I fix gamma 2. I get f2, which becomes k by 4 parities, which has only, my expression of f2 will have only k by 4 parities. So in the first, I will fix root k parities. Second time, I will fix root k by 2 parities, then root k by 4 parities. And if you just add these up, you will get order of
This gamma 2 that has been picked is from active parities of F1. I mean,
good. So this is the problem. So this proof is actually incorrect, and you have pointed out the correct point. Remember that when I fix gamma 1, my restriction is a whole set of functions. Correct? If I look at the active parities for each of them, then I have k by 2 parities. For an individual function, the number of parities might be small. So what is gamma? On what function am I applying Sang's lemma? Let me just clarify.
One which retains the maximum number of active parities.
Right. Very nice. That is what we are going to do, but why does it work? Right. So let me just clarify what I mean by that. You know, you had k parities. Gamma 1 to gamma. Correct? Now, when you fixed parities in gamma, let's say gamma 1, gamma 2 paired up, gamma 3, gamma 4 paired up, gamma k minus 1, gamma k paired up, right? All these got paired up, that is correct. But each of them have some coefficient. Remember, the expression was f restricted to gamma b x was now it might happen for one restriction. There, how many restrictions are there? 2 to the power mod gamma, right? These are the many choices. These many assignments are possible for a set with gamma parities. For some function, some restriction, some PJB might be non-zero. For some other PJB might be non-zero. Correct. And now Udit's idea is perfect. He says that let's pick the function which has the maximum sparsity. Let's pick the restriction. If I look at f gamma b, there are 2 to the power mod gamma functions, restricted functions. Pick one of these functions, pick one function out of this 2 to the power mod gamma which has the highest sparsity. The problem is, it will not be a problem, we will show that, but at this point, you know, you have k by 2 active parities. It might happen that all of these are well distributed. Some function depends just on first 2 parities, some function depends only on third, fourth parity, and so on and so. So then when I pick the next f, it might at a very bad level only have these many active parities. You know, 2 to the power mod gamma, this becomes very, very small. And then if I apply Sang's lemma on this, it is not going to help me a lot. I want to apply Sang's lemma on a function with big sparsity. Right? So what we are going to do is exactly what Rit said. I'm going to pick the function, the restriction which has the highest sparsity. But I need to show that that greedy approach, the function which I'm going to pick, actually has a big sparsity. If the number of active parities are large, you know, at this case, the number of active parities were k by 2. If the number of active parities are large, at least one restriction will have very large sparsity. This is what I will have to show. So what is the modified algorithm? I start with f, apply Sang's lemma. This arrow is kind of a Sang's lemma. Then I get f1, f2, f2 to the gamma. These many functions. Again, greedily pick fi. That means I will pick out of these 2 to the power gamma, I will pick the f which is highest sparsity and apply Sang's lemma. That will give me some new parities, gamma 1. So now I have fixed gamma union gamma 1. Now I will have more restrictions, f1, f2, f2 to the power mod gamma union gamma. Once again, look at all these, greedily pick fi, the function which has highest sparsity. Fix that. And now f1, f2 to the power gamma union gamma 1 union gamma 2. But if this has to work, then each of these greedy pickings should be good. Remember, why do we like Sang's lemma? Because just by fixing root k parities, the number of active parities decrease by half. But if already, if lemma we are applying on, if you're applying on a function whose sparsity is very small, whose sparsity was just 2, then our advantage is minimal. We want to apply Seng's lemma on a on a function which has lot of sparsity. So that is the main important. And let's see what is that. Okay. So let's get back to our analysis. At any point, I would have fixed some gamma set of parities, and from that, I can define an equivalence relation, which is the same equivalence relation which we saw in the beginning of the case. Right? So my proof of this will revolve around two things. I will show that you take a function, pick a gamma, you will always have one of the functions here which will have high sparsity. That sparsity will be enough so that at every step we will reduce it we will reduce lot of parities, and finally only by fixing root k log k parities we will fix it.
So over here, the gamma that you are referring to, is it, I mean, the dimension? Because
No, it is the set of parities.
I mean, for example, say my parity is x1, x2 and x1, x2. That is my set.
X1, x2
and x1, x2.
It cannot be, right? All my gammas are linearly independent, right?
Okay. Oh yeah, that's
right. So at every step, I get set of active parities, and using gamma, I can define the number of equivalence classes, the number of active parities. This is something which we have seen till now. This is needed to analyze what happens to the function when we fix some parities. Is the definition of any of these quantities not clear to you? Okay. Then I will tell you the main lemma. Remember what I wanted to show. If I fix a gamma, I have lot of restrictions. I have to the power gamma restrictions. At least one of those restrictions should have high sparsity. Sorry, I should say here. Okay. So this is the main lemma. This is the lemma which makes everything work. It says, if I pick a gamma, the number of equivalence classes will be L. This is the number of active parities. If the number of active parities are large, if I still have lot of parities remaining, there exists a restriction which has very big sparsity. So what can I do? I can just apply Seng's lemma on that particular restriction. Notice that if L is already root k, if the number of active parities are already root k, I can just choose all of them in my set, right? Those I can automatically take care of. So that's why I'm not worried about the case when L is very, very small. If L is very, very small, all those active parities I will anyway take in my span, in my rank. My problem is when L is very big. When I still have a lot of active parities remaining, I want to use Seng's lemma and build a lot of relationships. This lemma shows there exists one restriction like this. There exists one function on which you can apply Seng's. Is this sufficient? That we will see later. If I find a function whose sparsity is more than L square by k, why do we get a bound of root k log k? That's a bit of calculation we will do at the end. That is not clear yet. Okay, that we will do. But intuitively, this should be clear to you that this is what we wanted to show. At every point, we will have a good enough function to apply Seng's. And if I look at the look at the proof of this lemma, it's actually best shown by a picture. What is the picture? Again, remember what happens if I fix parities in gamma? Right? So I had L equivalence classes, and then my function looks like this. Right? This is something which we had seen. This Pj is the polynomial which clubs together all the parities which were in the same equivalence class. Okay. Now, what is the parity? What is the sparsity of f gamma b?
L.
No, number of non-zero PJBs, right?
Okay. Okay.
By definition. When I put b in this polynomial, some of the polynomials will go to 0, some of the polynomials will not become 0. So whichever ones don't go to 0, that will be the sparsity of the f gamma b. Right? It need not be n, right? It can be much lesser. If it was L, then I would be happy. But unfortunately, it might happen that for all b's, the parity is much smaller than L, and then I don't have a good function to apply sense. Okay. So make this matrix. What is this matrix? Every column is indexed by the polynomial or the equivalence class. Okay. So this is the first equivalence class, second equivalence class, Lth equivalence class. Right. These are the parities which are grouped together. And on the rows, you have the assignments. And you put 1 if you get a non-zero thing here and 0. This is how you are filling out this matrix. Right? What do we want to show? We want to show that there exists an assignment whose sparsity is high. That means in terms of this matrix, there exists a row which has
high non-zero.
lot of ones, right? So I'm not putting the coefficient here, right? I'm putting 1 if PJB is not equal to 0. So lot of ones in some row. And generally, when you have a matrix like this, you want to prove that there exists a row which has high number of ones, then you want to analyze number of ones in the
Columns.
So if I take the number of ones in the column and divide by 1 by 2 to the power gamma, this is the probability that PJB is not equal to 0. Correct? I'm just writing it in terms of probability. Right? So this is, I can say, number of B's such that PJB is not equal to 0 divided by 2 to the power gamma. Correct? So I'm just using I'm just normalizing it by 1 by 2 to the power. But my claim is this is greater than 1 by support of PJ. Why is that true? This is called uncertainty principle, by the way. But have you seen this?
I mean, sparsity of f into sparsity f hat is greater than.
Very good. This is something which you proved in your assignment, right? This was an assignment question. This follows from assignment. This is known as uncertainty principle. If you are interested, you can read about it read more about it from Roald Dahl's book. But there's not much. But the point is that if you pick a function, then sparsity of f and sparsity of f hat, at least one of them has to be large. Okay, this is why is it called uncertainty principle, by the way?
It matches Heisenberg's principle.
Right. So this is what I am saying is in the Boolean hyperthesis. If you look at it in the real and complex domain, it is actually some interpretation of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Okay. Remember, if you remember your physics, then it says either error in momentum or error in position has to be high. Here, I am saying either the sparsity of f or sparsity of f hat should be more than. Okay, and then this should give you the idea. I won't say more about it. The proof is given in the notes, but what you are saying is that every row, every column has decently high number of ones. If that is true, then at least one of the rows should have high number of ones. That's the intuition. That's the proof for your main lemma. Correct? You wanted to show that there exists a restriction which has high sparsity. This was equivalent to saying that there is a row which has high number of ones. Using uncertainty principle, we know that all columns have decent amount of number of ones. So just by averaging, count the total number of ones in the matrix, divided by 2 to the power gamma, at least these many number of ones should be there for one of the functions. That's all. That is what the proof of that main implies. The details you can find in the notes. So I will skip the proof. But now, once we have this, right? If L were the number of equivalence classes, then there exists a function which had this much sparsity, right? Remember, K was the sparsity of the initial function, and L were the number of equivalence classes. And now I want to analyze how many parities I need to fix so that my entire function becomes constant, irrespective of what assignment am I fixing, right? Remember, now we're talking about the number of active parities, and the number of active parities become 0. This is what I want to do. So let's count. Remember, we have iterations. Let's say after first iteration, I have fixed gamma 1. After second iteration, I have fixed gamma 2. After ith iteration, I have fixed gamma I. In the first iteration, I applied sense lemma on F1. Then, in the ith iteration, I fixed Fi. The number of equivalence classes with respect to this gamma 1 to gamma 2 I are L1 up to Li. And then each of them, like in ith iteration, I am fixing Qi. So what I'm interested in is summation. Okay. This is what I want to bound. I want to say that this is square root K log K. The number of parities fixed are small. And in every iteration, I have an idea of how many parities I have fixed. Okay. So first thing, yeah, the important thing to notice is I arrive at gamma I because I am applying Sang's lemma on
I minus Fi minus.
Fi minus
Fi minus 1, right? Very good. That means Qi is going to be order of square root of sparsity of Fi. So this is Sang's lemma. Whichever function you are going to apply on, square root of the sparsity of that is the number of parities you must fix. And how much advantage you will get, how many number of active parities will it reduce? Actually, these are exactly sparsity of Fi minus 1 divided by remember, at least 2 parities are getting merged together, right? In Sang's lemma, at least 2 parities always get merged together. So this is these many equivalence classes gets destroyed every time. In ith iteration, these many parities will get destroyed. Number of active parities will reduce by this. That means I will track the ratio Qi divided by Li minus 1 minus Li. This will become order of 1 by sparsity of, I should say, square root of sparsity of Fi. Right? And what do I know about sparsity of Fi minus 1? What did I know? That even at the stage Fi, I minus 1th stage, there exists a function whose sparsity was very high.
Less greater than or equal to L square by K.
Li minus 1 square. Right?
Yes, Li minus 1.
So just putting it this, I get this form. Right? I have transferred Li minus 1 minus Li to here, and this is just Li square, Li minus 1 whole square by K square. The inverse of that. And now you reorganize, you get this. Square root K comes out. What you are left with is summation over I, Li minus 1 minus Li divided by Li. And this is given to you as an exercise in the notes. It's easy to see that this becomes square root K. So the number of parities fixed are square root log K log K, and then all my active parities are destroyed. The number of active parities will become constant. This is the proof that rank is order of square root K. Again, to understand it completely, you might want to go through notes that has every step explained. But again, the idea is Seng's lemma tells us that if the function has high sparsity, then you can destroy a lot of active parities. And we simply using uncertainty principle, simply using idea of uncertainty principle, we were at every stage, we were able to find at least one sparsity, which had high sparsity. Sorry, we were able to find one function whose sparsity was very high. So we were able to apply Seng's lemma. So to conclude, the rank has two bounds. It is definitely greater than log K. It is less than square root K log K. This cannot be improved. This, the best thing we know is addressing. That means it's still an open question if the log K factor is necessary. Can we remove log K factor, or there exists function for which rank is actually root K? If you can solve this, that's a very good article. That's a very good. With that, I will finish today's class. Are there any questions?